Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Shevuos Daf Ches, Shevuos 8. And today's Daf Yomi, we're continuing a brisa and explaining a brisa that we discussed yesterday. That the Mishnah discussed if there was a knowledge that a person was tamei at the outset, they knew that they became tamei, and then they forgot about it and they went into the temple, Tumas Mikdash Vikadash, where they ate the sacred food. And then they never realized that they had actually gone in. Ein b'yediyah b'sof. They don't know about it. So then the Mishnah said that the goat that is brought inside the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur, that is actually brought in the sanctuary, in the Holy of Holies and in the Paroches and on the golden altar, is brought sprinkled in those places. This goat is Toa, and this goat is then Toa. So this goat suspends the punishment. That's the language of the Mishnah. Toa ache yivadalo v'yavi ba'ola v'yored. And so he has it suspended until he realizes that he sinned, and then he brings a carbon ola v'yored. In that context, the Brisa discusses this at length. And so now our daf on Chasam and Aleph is going to be analyzing this brisa. So we're going to continue with what we're up to, which is 7 lines from the top. That the brisa stated, because we had established in the brisa that atones for the sin of Yediyah B'tchila and not in this in Yediyah B'sof, that it atones for only that sin. That you have knowledge at the outset, but not at the end. Maybe we would think it atones for 3 other tumos, which the Brisa said are the tuma of idolatry, adultery, and murder. Tamar mitumos. The pasuk says, "V'chipra al kodesh mitumos b'nei Yisrael mipishehem u'kol chatosam." So this is from this week's parsha. So that the Sayar Nas B'fnim atones from the tumos, which means, but not all the tumos. And so then the Brisa says, "Ma matzino shechil hakosa mikol kol hatumos, betumos mikdash v'kadashav. Avkam betumos mikdash v'kadashav." There, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, just like through a comparison that we know that the Torah is more lenient and distinguishes the tumas mikdash v'kadashav from all the other tumos, so too with respect to this, with respect to the goat serving as an atonement on the inside, so too with respect to this, it will atone for the tumas mikdash v'kadashav. So the Gemara says, in what respect is the tumas mikdash v'kadashav different from all the other tumos? My chilek, how is it different? So the Gemara says it's different to maisi but all of the ori, because normally the sin offering you bring a chatas, which is one fixed offering, but with respect to tumas mikdash v'kadashav, you bring the carbon all of the ori, which depends upon your economic status. Gemara says, but Ema Avodah Zarah, maybe mitumos is not referring to Tumas Mikdash HaKadosh, maybe refers to the sin of idolatry. Hold on. So maybe it refers to the sin of idolatry. And what's the distinction? The Maisi Se'ira V'lo Kispa. That the Avodah Zarah is different, because normally for a chatas you can bring a goat or a sheep, but for the Avodah Zarah you can only bring a sa'ir. So maybe that's a distinction. Amar Rav Kahana, Anan chilek lahakel kamrinan, v'hai chilek lahachmir. No, we need a distinction to be lenient, because the sa'ir is serving as a leniency in that it's atoning for you. So we wanted to see another example where it's lenient. And the goat of Avodah Zarah is a stringency. You can't bring a sheep. You have to only bring a goat. Whereas the carbon all the orid is a leniency. If you're poor, you can bring a poorer carbon. So the Gemara says, well, Ema Yoedes. Maybe it refers to the woman who gives birth, that we know that she has to bring that maybe what the Havamin of the Gemara is, that maybe since a woman who gives birth, she's what's called Mechusar Kippurim, she can't eat in Kachim until such time as she brings her offering. So maybe it refers to the fact that if this sire was brought, then she doesn't need to bring her korban, and she can eat the kachim without a korban. So the imioedes, the chilek, that how is it different to Maisi olav yored, that she also brings not exactly the same olav yored as we're talking about with respect to Tumas Mikdash v'Kadasha, but she brings, if she's wealthy, she brings sheep, and if she's poor, she brings two birds. If she's wealthy, she brings a sheep and one bird, and if she's poor, she brings two birds. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Hoshaya, kol chatasam v'lo kol tumasam. No, the Yoedis is not a sinner. The pasuk says, kol chatosam. So this sire is serving to atone for your sins, but not for your tumah. And the Yoedis is ritually impure, but it's not, she hasn't sinned. Gemara says, yeah, but some say she has sinned. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, the Amar Yoedis nami chotasi. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says the Yoedis is a sinner. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, how does he know it doesn't refer to a Yoedis, the sire? So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Ma'iko Mimer, or Rabbi Shimon Tamei. Rabbi Shimon follows his logic. The Amar Mimakomahu Mochra. In the Brisa, Rabbi Shimon says we don't learn out what the sire distinguishes from what the sire atones for. The sire anasa b'fnim, what it atones for. We don't learn it out from a mamatzino, from a comparison. We learn it out from the pasuk. We learn out from the words of the pasuk itself, because the pasuk says v'chiper al kodesh mitumos b'nei Israel. So from the tumos of kodesh. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon doesn't learn out from the mamatzino. So this is not going to be a problem. So the Gemara says, well, ema mitzora. Maybe we learn out from the fact of the mitzora, because mitzora has the same leniency as the Oedes, that he also is a korban of the Ored. And so maybe that's the same. So maybe it's telling us that the Mitzora can eat from the kachim before his korban. No, the Mitzora also, he is not a sinner, he has a tumah. But the Gemara says, but not everybody. Some say he is a sinner. Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani, the Amar al Shiva Dvarim Negaim Baim. According to Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani, this is what according to Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani, and this is what we discussed in last week's parasha of Tazria Mitzora, that the Gemara in Erech and Tetzvav Hamid Aleph discusses the 7 things that the reasons why Negayim come, the sin, most prominent, most famously, the sin of Lashon Hara. So then there is so why don't we say it's coming to atone for the Mitzora? So the Gemara is Michael Mimer, Hastam Negia de Ich Barway, the Carbon to Uriye Bekahom. There, with respect to the Mitzora, the Carbon is not the Kapara. The Negios are the Kapara. The afflictions are the Kapara. The pain of the afflictions, and the Carbon is just allowing him to come back into the community and to remain with the Kachim. So that's how the Gemara appears in, not as the Kalash to Ruye Bekachim, to eat from the Kachim. That's a different Girsa. That's what the Gemara appears in Sota. The Ema Nazir Tame, maybe it refers to a Nazir who became Tame, that the Chilek, the Maisi Tarmu B'nei Yonah, that the Nazir who becomes Tame, he also has a leniency. And what's his leniency? Because he has to bring 2 birds, and that is a leniency because he doesn't need to bring an animal like all other tumos. He just can bring 2 birds, and that's a leniency. So the Gemara says, no, this is also for his tumah, not for his sin. Kumar says, according to Rebbe Lazar Akapar, who says that Nazir is also a sinner, that Nazir is also a sinner, maybe it's to tell us that the Nazir doesn't need to bring the birds. Kumar says, no, Rebbe Lazar Akapar holds like Rebbe Shimon, who says, no, you learn out from the pasuk. So, okay, it would be a question according to Rebbe Lazar Akapar, but he's not bothered because he would hold like Rebbe Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, let's go analyze his position. He says that you learn out from the pasuk itself, because the pasuk says, from the tumah of the kodesh, that's what the Sayar Anas Bifnim atones for. So the Gemara says, Shaper Kama Rabbi Shimon. It's a good logic. Why does Rabbi Yehuda have to learn out from a Mamatzino? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda Amocha So no, Rabbi Yehuda is saying we need a pasach chipra kodesh mitumos to tell us that just like we do it in the Holy of Holies, we sprinkle the goat in the inside the Kodesh Kodashim. So too, we should sprinkle the blood on the sanctuary, and the same exact numbers, 1 above and 7 below. And we sprinkle it from the blood of the bull and from the blood of the goat. And so the Chipra Kodesh is coming to tell us that in the sanctuary, you do it just like you did it inside the Holy of Holies between the poles of the ark. So you do it on the parochas. So for Rabbi Shimon, and how does Rabbi Shimon know that? He learns it out from the fact that the pasuk says which means do it just like you did it in the Holy of Holies. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, if that was the source, I might have thought you have to bring a different bull and a different goat, and sprinkle their blood in the sanctuary. So that's what it's telling us. Kamash Mon, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon, how does he know that? He says means minei mashma, means in parts from the same goat that you did the first time. Amar Mar Yoch. So next line in the Brayso, Yochal called Tuma Shava Kodesh Yisar Zam Mechaper. I might think that this goat serves as an atonement for all the sins of Yedios Atuma, not just Yedios Atuma at the outset, Yedios Atuma Betchila V'Einon Yodim B'Sof, V'Einon Yodea B'Sof. I might think it atones for all the different possibilities. So as the verse, Tam Omar Mi Pishehem L'Kol Chatosam. So the verse says, from their sin, Mi Pishehem L'Kol Chatosam. Meaning to say, not for all of their sins does it serve as an atonement, but just for some of them. Hold on, I'm looking back at the Brisa. Chataim, and the Brisa continues, Chataim dumyo de pishayim, the sins similar to the intentional ones. Ma pishayim she'ena b'nei karban, just like those pishayim that don't have a karban, also those sins that don't have a karban. So that's the full statement of the Brisa. So the Gemara says, so my niyah, what are those sins that don't have a karban? Yesh b'yediyah b'tchila. It can't be if you have knowledge at the outset, and you have knowledge at the end. Haibar karbanhu. So that anyways you have to bring a carbon because you have knowledge of it. So what's it coming to exclude? Well, it's the other way. No, it's excluding the case where you knew about your sin, you knew you went into the base of Mikdash, it's Tumah, but you found out right next to the Shkiyas Achama, right next to sunset on Erev Yom Kippur. So Sakadai Techamina, you might have thought Adamaisi, that until he's able to bring it, Nitleway, that this sire that's brought inside on Yom Kippur, and we're on top of Chesam Abayz, will serve as an atonement for him until he's able to bring it. Kamash Mulan, we don't say that it only serves if you don't have Yediyah. Amar Mar Minaya Sheyeshba, the next line of the Brisa is, how do we know if you have Yediyah B'Tchila Ve'im B'Yediyah B'Sof Shezayir is that Torah? So then the Brisa says, how do we know if you have Yediyah at the beginning and not at the end, that this knowledge, that this goat that's brought inside the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur is suspends the punishment. Minayin, Ma'ika Kashulei. So the Gemara's question is, we don't understand. Why is this difficult? The Rashi says, the Amru Minayin shal zeh mechaper. Hayaflei da'al she'ena bas karban mechaper v'zu ena bas karban v'asilei mechatayim dum yid b'shayim. We just learned it out that it atones for those areas where you don't know that you could bring a karban for it, and we learned it out from the sins that are similar. That it doesn't take care of those sins that are similar to the peshayim. So the Gemara says, "Hachika kashli." The Gemara was bothered. The Bride was bothered by this. That's just like you said that the sins that are similar to the accidental sins, similar to the intentional. So it's ma'apshayim d'avnei karban, af chatam nami d'blei karban. So he said just like those intentional sins that you never bring a karban for, I might have thought also those accidental sins that you don't bring a karban for. Ema, and I might have thought ma'apshayim d'avnei karban la'olam, just like you never ever bring a karban for this p'shayim. Also, there's chatam that you'll never ever bring a carbon. And what is that? What is that case? Where you have no yediyah at the outset, because then you never knew, but you have yediyah at the end. But if you have yediyah at the beginning and not at the end, keeping the kimis yadulei bar carbon, since once he finds out he has to bring a carbon, I might have thought that this goat does not suspend the penalty. And if you want to say, and if you were thinking to say that if you don't have the yediyah at the outset, but you have yediyah at the end, and if you want to say, let's say this case where you don't have yediyah at the outset, but you have yediyah at the end, we already know that the goat that's brought in the courtyard on Yom Kippur, the goat of the Musaf, that serves as an atonement. I might have thought I might have thought that we reverse it, that we say it's the opposite. That it's that we switch it and we say the goat that's on the outside serves for where you have knowledge at the beginning and not the end, and the goat on the inside serves where you don't have knowledge at the beginning and not at the end. So Amar Kro Chol Chatosam Mikal B'nei Chatos Ninu. So the pasuk says Chol Chatosam to tell us that it serves as an atonement. The goat that's serves as atonement for those that can come to a chatos, and means to say that you have yediyah at the outset but not at the end. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why do you have to bring? If you ever find out about it, why do you have to bring a kapar? Why do you have to bring a carbon? The goat that's brought inside should serve as a complete atonement. Gemara says, if it had said from all of their sins, it would be like you said. So, but the fact that the language is for all their sins, it means for those that come to the possibility of a chatas. So now the Gemara asks the major question, the essential question that we've been leading up to. So what does this goat really do? This goat that's brought inside of Yom Kippur, so it doesn't serve as an atonement. So if that's the case, what do you mean it suspends the penalty? What does that mean? What does it do? It's just Gemara is asking a fundamental question. What does this goat serve? What's its function? So the Gemara answers, deep answer. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Zera Lamar she'emeis meis blo avon. Rabbi Zera says it's to tell us if you would die at that point, you would be dying without a sin. And so therefore it clears away your sin. If he dies without knowing he sinned, then this goat takes care of your punishment. Gemara says, Amroi Rava, what are you talking about? It meis misa mamrakis. If you die, the death serves as an atonement. And you don't have to worry about it. So it says, Rava, lahagin alav minay yisurim. It protects you from affliction. So the goat that is brought in the temple on Yom Kippur protects you from receiving a punishment until you know that you sinned and you bring a carbon over your raid. And Rashi explains on Daf Beis that even though he doesn't know that he sinned, nevertheless he should be concerned. So from the fact that all of those who sinned accidentally need an atonement when they realize they sinned, that proves that prior to that, they're capable of getting a punishment. And so therefore we see from here that it's protecting him from afflictions. The next line in the Mishnah was, if you have no yediyah at the outset, but you have a yediyah at the end, and the goat that's brought in the courtyard, the goat of Musaf, and Yom Kippur serve as an atonement. Gemara says, Milchte iskushe ifkush la'adadi. Well, so the Gemara asks a fundamental question that since the two goats are compared to each other, because it says in the pasuk, Sa'ira zim echal chatas milvad chatas akipurim. So the chatas akipurim is the sa'ir that's inside, and the sa'ir zim echad is the sa'ir outside. So since the pasuk compares the two, nechaper pnimi adidei v'adechitzon. Why do you need two goats? Why can't the inner goat serve as atonement for both. And this would help in a case where you didn't do the outer one. So let's say you don't have enough goats. So Amakra Achas, it says V'chiper Aaron al Karnosav Achas B'Shana. Meaning to say Kapara Achas Mechaper Ve'enu Mechaper Shtei Kapara. So it only serves as one atonement, not two. Gemara says Unechaper Chitzon Adidei Amaydav Panimi. So why don't we say that the outer goat could serve as an atonement, and also it'll serve as an atonement for what the inner goat would coming, and not go away. But let's say a person entered into the temple in a state of ritual impurity in between the Sayar Bifnim and the Sayar B'chutz. Amakra Achas B'Shana. So the pasuk says once a year. Kapara, meaning to say Kapara Zu Lo Tehei Ela Achas B'Shana. It only serves as one and not as two. So okay, that's today's daf yomi. We'll stop the recording here.